there's a difference between buying a lot of stuff very quickly, very mindlessly, and being intentional with your purchases, no matter how many of them you make. Hello, welcome back to Classics with a Quirk, where I talk about contemporary and luxury designer items and brands with a touch of silliness. If this is the kind of content you find interesting, please do like this video and subscribe for more of it. Thank you. My intro aside, if you've been here before, you know that I do talk about primarily luxury and sometimes contemporary goods on this channel. But today I want to do something a little bit different. We have been talking about luxury mindfulness, mindful consumption, and also luxury minimalism kind of a lot in the YouTube space recently. Now, often when one thinks about minimalism, or at least when a lot of people think about the current idea of minimalism, especially minimalism on social media, I think a lot of them think of like bare walls, very minimalistic furniture, not a lot of things in general. Like the person making the video is sitting in an empty space against a blank background and they've got nothing in their lives really. And so recently, for a lot of people, when they think of that particular minimal aesthetic, they can't really think of somebody who collects goods or of any sort of thing, any type of collection, as being minimalistic in any way, because you're collecting things, you have stuff in your life. That's not minimal. But I think that there's something to be said for if you consume mindfully for the rest of your life and you don't buy a lot of stuff for the rest of your life, I think there's something to be said for that in terms of what minimalism might be. Now, I'm not saying that minimalism is good or bad. I don't think that minimalist aesthetic is good or bad, and I don't think maximalism is good or bad either. I think that everybody has their own path in life and in their own way to enjoy how they live. And for some people, owning a lot of stuff, being a maximalist and having many collections or having a lot of different things in their house and in their space makes them feel good, makes them feel happy, and not having a lot of things might make them feel less happy about their life and how they experience their life. In the same vein, there are people who get overwhelmed by clutter and they only want to have a very minimal aesthetic and they only want a few items of clothing, a few accessories, one pair of shoes. And that also is fine if that's what works for them. I think my only real issue with the minimal aesthetic is that a lot of times I see on social media that if you're not a minimalist, that equates you to being like a bad or selfish person. And I don't think that that's the case. I think that people can enjoy life however they do. And for somebody who has 20 handbags or 50 handbags, if that's how they enjoy their items and that's how they spend their money and choose to spend their frivolous money, that's really fine. They're not any worse off than somebody who has only one handbag. They're not better off than someone who only has one handbag. And the person who has one handbag, maybe that's what makes them happy, but it doesn't mean that they're better than the person who has 50 or 20 or something like that. People are different. People are allowed to explore things in different ways and allowed to consume things in different ways, or at least that's my opinion. I think it's very interesting how minimalism has taken over a lot of spaces on social media, in that you need to have this very sort of beige aesthetic with not very many things in your life to be considered almost a successful person nowadays. There's a very big declutter mindset and lifestyle that I think has been pushed on social media. A lot of influencers are decluttering their collections or decluttering their wardrobes. A lot of general people making content are making content about decluttering. And again, I think that if somebody is overwhelmed with what they own, that is perfectly fine. Maybe you need to downsize because you're moving to a new space that has less room. Maybe you need to sell some things on, so you're decluttering so you can put some things on eBay or on Poshmark or something. Those are all valid reasons to declutter. But I think that sometimes there's a narrative that you need to declutter to almost be a good person. Like if you have too much stuff, that's bad for you. You're in the consumption mindset. You're in a scarcity mindset as opposed to abundance mindset. And I think part of the rise of decluttering was, when Marie Kondo got very big, Marie Kondoing your life was a very big thing for a while, and still I think is in a lot of places, where it's just like minimizing what you own to feel joy from everything that you do own. But I think that a lot of people miss is one of the things Marie Kondo talks about is, yes, it's experiencing joy in what you have. So if you enjoy the things that you have, there's no reason to get rid of them. There was an example once where somebody talked to her about having a pen collection, and he said that what if he had dozens and dozens of pens, and that was what he enjoyed and he collected them? Would he have to declutter them to only having a few pens in order to be a successful person at Marie Kondoing his life? And she said, no, if you enjoy each and every one of those pens, then they're good to have in your life because they bring you joy. And I think that's very wise to understand what in your life does bring you joy, because for some people, having a very big wardrobe is what brings them joy. They're really into fashion, they really like changing up their look or their outfits or their style, so having a variety of things is better for them than having, say, a capsule wardrobe. While yes, there is something to be said about overconsumption. We live in a society that does push a lot of product at us very often, very fast. The fast fashion industry is a huge problem, both financially and environmentally. That is very, very true. But there's a difference between buying a lot of stuff very quickly, very mindlessly, and being intentional with your purchases, no matter how many of them you make. You can have two different people who buy the same amount of clothes and even the same types of clothes, and have one person be consuming them in a more mindless, trend-driven, media frenzy-driven fashion versus somebody who might be buying the exact same things but who is intentional in purchasing each one of those pieces, and each of those 20 items bring them joy. And that, I think, is what we really should be taking away from the idea of not necessarily minimalism, but mindful consumption as a whole. What is it that makes us truly happy when it comes to things? If we do gain happiness from things, there are people who don't really want to possess anything and they'd rather spend all their money on travel or something like that, or on food. That is also, perfectly fine. We're a varied species. We need different things to thrive and different things that we enjoy, and that's great. But it is true that a lot of us do like things. Humans are magpies, humans are collectors. We've always been this way. We have prehistoric findings from people who have collected shiny stones and baubles that have just been part of our lives forever. And so there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to have stuff. Having things that make you happy, having an apartment filled with stuff that brings you joy, can really lend to part of the fulfillment of enjoying your life to the fullest. It really can. There's nothing wrong with having stuff, and there's nothing wrong with getting joy out of having those things. Because yes, it's true that there are people who buy to fill a void. They are consuming mindlessly. They're just purchasing and purchasing and purchasing, and then they purchase those items, it gets thrown in a closet or thrown in a drawer, and then they need the next hit. They need to buy the next thing. They're never satisfied. And I feel that that's really where the line is. If you can buy something and be satisfied versus if you buy something and immediately you're looking towards the next thing, then that might be a situation where shopping is something that's more detrimental and negative and harmful over something that actually actively improves your life and brings you positive thought and feeling. But as I said, that is different for different people. What might be unhealthy and harmful to one person might be a positive, joyful experience to another. It really comes down to each person's perspective and each person's situation. If a person is buying something that they cannot financially sustain, that is negative to them, that is harmful to them because they are spending outside their means. But if you have another person who is still buying things, however inexpensive or expensive those may be, however many those are, and they can financially support it and financially sustain it, and each of those individual items were purchased with intent and brings them happiness, then there's nothing really wrong with that. Circling back to luxury purchases for a quick minute, because this is a luxury channel and I do buy luxury things, I do buy expensive things. I think there's also judgment that is imparted onto people who purchase expensive things, even if they're not buying very many of them, because it is often seen as frivolous or wasteful to buy one really expensive item because it's really expensive. But that doesn't really take into account that you might be buying 12 less expensive items that equate to that one really expensive thing. So it's not really, I don't think that really matters how much money you're spending if you can afford it versus what you are buying mindfully. As you probably know, if you've been here before, I personally am very intentional with all of my purchases, and some of my purchases are, yes, very expensive. I've bought some very expensive things over the years, but for the most part, I very carefully go over every single thing that I buy. And so when I purchase something with intent, when I purchase something, even though it's very expensive, it is almost always a positive buy for me, because the thing that I purchase does bring me happiness and does bring me a sense of joy in owning it and adding it to my life. I guess my final thought on the matter is that each of us is only put on the earth for a finite amount of time. And it's really important to try to make your life on the planet more positive than negative. It's very important to find what makes you happy. For some people that might be doing a physical activity. For some people that might be traveling. For some people it might be enjoying different types of food. And for some people that might be acquiring their own little bundle of treasures. Nobody is a better or worse person for wanting to own something tangible versus wanting to have an experience. On the flip side, people who prefer to experience things aren't inherently better than the people who just prefer to own tangible items. There's a lot of different ways to find fulfillment, and I think that life is all about a balance. It's just a matter of finding out what is the best balance for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter. What do you think about minimalism, especially current modern day aesthetic minimalism? Or what do you think about luxury minimalism? Do you think that it's impossible to be considered a mindful buyer if somebody buys luxury items? Or do you think that there's room for being a luxury consumer and still being a mindful buyer? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know this was a bit of a rambly video, but I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please do give it a like. It super duper helps the algorithm, and subscribe for more content that helps the algorithm even more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.